Welcome, Adele Anderson from Life Coach Adele, and this is another episode of Good Grief Relief. Grief is filled with a myriad of emotions, all of them negative for the most part. And one of the things that we find that we weave out in and out of is overwhelm. And overwhelm is quite often accompanied by worrying, but they're two separate things. One is an emotion, and the other one is actually a thinking mechanism that's attached to the emotion. And then there are both positive and negative coping mechanisms. So let's take a deeper dive into overwhelm and how we can help ourselves transition through this period of time where it seems insurmountable. And part of it is that the trauma that we experience through grief has left us little or no time to process. And so our brain is trying to catch up. And yet, oftentimes there's things that have to do, or what happens often with overwhelm is avoidance. And so let's move through it slowly, one step at a time, and explore this feeling of overwhelm and how we can help ourselves. So feelings of grief can be described as deep sadness and sorrow. It's a sense of emptiness or loss. And there's an intense longing for what is lost. You know, it can be part of our life, our future, of course, our loved one. But it's far bigger than that, isn't it? Everything about our life, if this person was part of our day-to-day life, everything has changed. So it's big. It's probably one of the biggest experiences, deepest experiences that we'll ever have. Grief is filled with emotional pain and heartache. And sometimes we feel either numb or detached. So positive things to do would be to seek the support of loved ones or a therapist, allowing yourself to express and feel your emotions. We must feel that grief, even when it's painful. I caution not to get stuck in the pain, but it's important that we allow ourselves to feel and recognize grief. But engaging in activities, gentle activities that bring you comfort, such as spending time in mindfulness. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and it's the mechanism of what we call the fire drill, if you've heard of the fire drill, or what I often call 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But in this one, the therapist said, okay, so let me define 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. First of all, is 5 things that we can see. So we're talking about all our senses. 4 things that we can feel on the outside of our body. 3 things that we can hear. 2 things we can smell, and 1 thing we can taste. And so with that, what it does is it brings us into the moment. So we slow ourselves down. And then our brain can recognize that, okay, here I am sitting in front of my computer on my yoga ball. My lights are on, my computer is working. I can feel the warmth from my fireplace coming through. It's relatively calm outside. So inside my mind, I can have this recognition that I'm actually not in danger right now. Because when we feel overwhelmed, we feel out of control. So I'm holding my cell phone here as another example. So it can be anything. So what are you holding right now? Do you have a hold of something? If you don't, maybe it's a cup of coffee, grab that glass of water, pick that up. And then you can just recognize the weight of it, what it feels like in your hand, the texture of what you're holding. What is the feeling when you move it from right to left, not spilling your hot coffee on your lap? And then lean in. Maybe there's an odor to it. If you wanted to, you can taste it. But more important, you're just tuning into, there's a sound when I brush against it. There's a sound when I tap it. It has a flip cover. It's red on the inside versus black on the outside. And then there's a picture on my screen, which you can't see. And there's numbers that show the time. So I can go into all types of detail. So I want to move through my 5 senses. It can even be an emotion if, the water feels refreshing, for example, or the coffee tastes yummy. So you can move into that warmth, that coolness, that crispness, whatever it might be on a sensory expression. And if you can spend even 1 minute, just 1 minute of slowing your life down and tuning into this moment, it will actually reduce that feeling of overwhelm. So this is a coping mechanism. Rather than avoiding or trying to suppress your emotions or turn to substance abuse or unhealthy behaviors to numb yourself, we can adopt these simple mindful activities that slow our life down because our brain needs more time to process, to catch its breath. It's like so much has happened and it's like, can't quite catch your breath. And you might notice you're doing this. And this is a sign of grief. It has almost a jaggedness as you can't quite pull enough air into your body. And then we naturally try to slow down. And this is a normal mechanism, but it's also a signal that you're grieving. What might also be an unhealthy mechanism that you might recognize is isolating yourself. So wanting to hunker down, staying away from friends. And even though it's the best thing to do, for whatever reason, we don't reach out. And I was in that phase this morning for whatever reason. I was going through, probably about 90 minutes of just not feeling great. And I was questioning where I'm at. I'm 2.5 years into my process of healing my grief. And I still come through these little waves. And so I limited my normal morning routine, which is connecting with people. So I send little voicemails, I reach out on texts, I might send a funny anecdote to somebody or just a voicemail that says, you know what, I'm thinking about you this morning, sending you a good morning, because there might not be a good morning in someone's life who is grieving. Maybe they're the only person in the house, like it's here for me. And so we have these little routines that can be helpful rather than engaging in self-destructive behaviors as a way to cope with your pain. And it's not an unusual thing to do. But overwhelm is a feeling of being overloaded. There's just too much going on. It feels scattered. It's difficult to make decisions. Concentrating is difficult. There may be feelings of being out of control with life's demands. And then we notice it in our body. Tension, headaches, fatigue. I woke up with a headache this morning. So it's part of it. I've been fatigued the last couple of days. It's part of it. I just wasn't really thinking that it was connected to my grief. And yet here I am doing the research, and all of a sudden it's like, bingo, I recognize my behavior and the symptoms of grief within my everyday life. So what else might happen is racing thoughts. Because we're feeling out of control, we're trying to grasp ways to make ourselves feel in control. And that in itself is a form of worry. Worry is very intertwined with anxiety and the feelings that we have in our body. And then we think about it. So worrying is actually not an emotion. Go figure. Worrying is actually a state of mind, a state of thinking, and the thinking is negative, maybe repetitive, and a little bit of doomsday. The what if scenarios that usually take us into a rabbit hole, where positive coping mechanisms means chunking things down. So we have a task that has to be done. Let's pretend it's dishes. Dishes are one of these things that I like putting them in the dishwasher, but I don't necessarily taking them out. But I learned that there's actually something to do about that. Because when we're putting things in, we're feeling organized. We're doing a task, we're putting things in little slots or putting them in little racks. And so that makes us feel in control. And yet, taking them out means a little bit of disorganization. This goes over there and that goes over there, and it's a thing. And the other thing I heard, it was on Mel Robbins' podcast. It was one of her podcasts that was talking about the 8 most helpful personal anecdotes that she learned from her guests over 2023. And this doctor talked about tasks. And sometimes we feel overwhelmed. There's laundry, there's dishes, there's the vacuuming. And rather than thinking them as things that need to be done, think about things on a cycle. And I found that really a helpful thing, that these are things that are constantly in motion. And so not to expect that all of the dishes are going to be clean all of the time. Some of them are going to be sitting in the sink. Some of them are going to be in the dishwasher, and other ones will be, put back out for being used. And the same with clothing, right? I still have laundry in my laundry basket. I did my whites yesterday, but is laundry done? No, that task is more of a schedule. So we just keep that schedule rolling in a balance that we can manage today. And if laundry builds up a little bit too much, well, we'll get to it eventually. So don't worry. So more positive coping mechanisms are setting boundaries and prioritizing self-care. And quite often we do little things for ourselves, but without that intention, saying it to yourself. I am doing this for me. I am taking myself to lunch. I am pouring myself a bubble bath. I am taking the dogs out for a walk. This is also for me. Sure, the dogs get the benefit too, but our lovely pets give so much back unconditionally. So the other thing we can do is ask for help. People often ask, how are you? Loaded question, right? But I'm encouraging in one of my last episodes that how do we talk to somebody who grieved is to offer to do something, or to say, is there something I can do for you? Or even better, let me do something for you today. So become more comfortable with delegating tasks. Your load just might have doubled. If you just lost your spouse, there's no more pink and blue, is there? Everything is right here. So it's a lot. So take this opportunity. When you used to say, hey, can you take out the garbage? You can ask somebody else to do that. Or ask somebody else to say, hey, I could just use a little bit of help today in tidying up my house. I'm feeling overwhelmed and I would love to spend time with you. And hopefully somebody who's listening here is listening because they have a close friend or family member who's grieving. And so here's an opportunity for you to step into that role and pick up a task that the person who's grieving is maybe having difficulty or feeling challenged in their everyday life. And so let's work together as we overcome grief as a community. Grief is not isolated to just us. It affects everyone around us, doesn't it? And so together we thrive. Everybody hurts, but together we thrive. A great positive coping mechanism is relaxation techniques. Probably our number one goal or go-to for that is breath. Some people choose meditation, but I know some people find it more difficult. But meditation might be many different things to many different people. It's just a single-minded action. So if you're knitting, you're actually most likely in a form of meditation. If you are fishing, if you are playing pickleball, if you are playing tennis, if you are cooking and following a recipe book, you're in a form of meditation because your focus is on the task that you're doing. So choose something that you love naturally and do more of it. Because less effective coping mechanisms mean ignoring or denying the feelings of being overwhelmed, procrastinating and avoiding responsibilities for the things that have to be done. So again, you may want a coping partner, someone who will say, okay, let's break this down. Let's move through this step and just take one step forward, maybe this morning, and possibly another step this afternoon. Or maybe that's too much. Let's break it down even further. But commit to yourself to not taking too much on, because engaging in unhealthy coping mechanisms is like sitting down and eating an entire family's worth of dinner. We don't feel good after that. Our body doesn't feel good. Excessive drinking, have a hangover. We can see that excessive things have their downside, big downside too. So that's enough about overwhelm. Let's talk about worry, because I bet, like me, that you've described your emotions as I'm worrying, I'm a worrier. And yet worrying is not an emotion. It's actually a thing. It's a thinking thing. It's a thing about overthinking and repetitive thoughts about potential future events that might never happen. The stats on worrying is 98% of what we worry about never happens. Isn't that extraordinary? But what happens is it often feels like anticipatory anxiety, fear, negative scenarios that impact and make us feel uncomfortable in our body. For me, it's in my chest and in my stomach. And we can use neuroscience to actually go in and see how our brain holds that information, because it's not under the label of worry in our brain. It's under how it sees, how it visualizes, how it sounds, how it feels inside our body. And that shape, color, texture, odor, movement thing inside of here is how your brain recognizes worry or anxiety or grief. And so we can actually go in and change that. The science behind it is if we change three things while we change our heart rate, respiration, and body temperature, because yes, all of these things have their own signature: respiration, body temperature, and heart rate. And so we change it, and an apple will never be a banana. So know that if you are worrying, it often tends to exaggerate itself. It actually increases anxiety if left unchecked. And stress and anxiety have become the #1 mental illness in the world. And so I caution you, it is not healthy. It is really unhealthy. It has become one of the leading indicators for almost every disease on the planet. So, one last thing about worry, and then we're going to look at coping mechanisms, positive ones. So, but worrying, cognitive processes of overwhelm, they get interrupted. We don't think clearly. And so how do we make it a little bit better? Mindfulness. Bring your awareness back to the present moment. What do you have at your disposal right now that you can describe in detail, going through all of your senses? So think, okay, visual, I can see color, I can actually see the texture, I can see the design, I can see the detail, I can see the three-dimensionalness of it, I can see the label, I can read the label, I can see three different colors, actually, white, blue, and gray. And that's just at the beginning. You know, it smells like cloth, and it smells a little bit dirty, of course, right? And there's a sound when I rub it, so I can hear that. And I don't really want to taste it, so I won't go there. But, I can feel it, I can see it, I can hear it, I can smell it. And so this, just by doing it for 1 minute, can bring me back into the present. And that is a positive coping mechanism. So challenge negative thoughts and replace them with more realistic, positive thoughts. Engage in problem-solving techniques by addressing the underlying cause. And then use other relaxation tips that are at your disposal. So that might mean beautiful music, something that calms you. Is there a person in your life that makes you feel calm, that has that calm demeanor? Maybe that's it. Because less effective coping mechanisms turn into that ruminating, dwelling on the worst case scenario. And we don't need that when we're already, feeling overwhelmed with our grief and our situation. And then I constantly just lean into reaching out to others that can support you. And these are very, very helpful. So, we can control what we can. So here we say, okay, here's my house. The heat's on, the light's on, the electricity turns on and off. I can cook on my stove. I've got food in my fridge. So these are very certain. So then avoid things that are uncertain. You don't have to move into an unknown task without help. You can have other people that help you with that because that's what people love to do. And so lean into and allow other people, especially if you were the person that always supported somebody else. And now you find yourself on the other end of the teeter-totter, and it feels unusual. But the joy that you received when you helped somebody, you're now gifting that ability for someone else to receive joy to them. Irrational fears, please don't allow them to dictate your behavior. And that comes to the end of today's podcast. I hope that you found it useful. And just knowing that there are many points that can recognize that you're feeling overwhelmed. And then there are positive coping mechanisms that can ease the overwhelm that you feel. Thank you for joining me today. My name was Adele Anderson, or is Adele Anderson, from Life Coach Adele. I'm here for you. You can reach my contact information in my show notes. And until we speak in person, I wish you a peaceful and unoverwhelming day. Bye now.